One Piece chapter 1100 sadly marks the end of the line for Kuma. Sure, in chapter 1101, we'll more likely see a bit more of Kuma's flashback, maybe showing us a possible never before seen first time encounter between himself and Luffy, and maybe even one last secret meeting between himself and Dragon, but make no mistake, this flashback is essentially over, and sadly, so is Kuma's life as a human. Because sadly, the ending of this chapter leaves us not long before Luffy sets off on his pirate journey, and as unbelievable as it may seem, because I still have a hard time believing it myself, the entirety of the story up until the time skip all takes place in under a year, meaning there's really not much else left for us to see about Kuma's life that we don't already know. I mean, yes, obviously Oda in the next chapter could pad out more time by doing a montage of missions Kuma gets sent on by the World Gov, or even maybe giving us more interactions between himself and Vegapunk during the time that Kuma has left, like for say, showing us an extended version of the conversation the two had about the weight of one's soul, if Oda wants to pull out our heartstrings just one last time. And the latter of those two options is definitely the better one to go with, because from what I can tell from the fandom online, the Kuma flashback, while incredibly sad and considered to be one of the top 5 in the entire series, has kind of officially overstayed its welcome, and everyone's ready to move on from it. But I'm willing to bet that even those who want the flashback to end will take one more chapter of it, if it focuses on Kuma's final moments as a human, and explains the memory bubble that he left behind. Because there are two possible scenarios for that bubble existing. Well, technically there's 3 of them, but the third one is incredibly heartbreaking. Either A, in order to complete the process of becoming a cyborg, Kuma had to expel all of his human memories from his body, making his brain a blank slate that only knows how to follow orders. And since he was no longer technically alive at this point, the memories couldn't return to him. Or B, and I actually think this might be the most likely option out of the 3, the bubble was there the entire time as a failsafe, with Vegapunk knowing that at some point the world government will try to get rid of him. The two probably planned to use the memories to essentially bring Kuma back to life after he was turned into a full-on cyborg, with a program being placed inside him that calls Kuma back to Egghead whenever the Gorosei give the order to kill Vegapunk. That way, once he regains his memories, the two of them can easily escape. And considering that by this time Bonney would no longer be under the government's watch, they would have nothing to hold over Kuma to force him to obey. So, if he left, they had no way of stopping him. And then of course there's option C, where it turns out that the bubble was always intended for Bonney, as a sort of final message for her so that once Kuma's gone, she can know that despite seemingly abandoning her, that he always loved her and wanted nothing more to take her on that journey. We're more than likely going to see Kuma create that bubble in the next chapter and find out the reason for it as well. And I can already tell you, whether it's one of the ones I already mentioned in this video or fourth reason entirely, I am going to be crying my eyes out at the finale of this flashback. Now onto a slightly happier topic. I gotta say, going back to my statement about adopted dads in One Piece, Kuma is going down as one of the best dads in the entire series. Hell, even one of the best parents, period. Right up there with both Whitebeard and Bellamere for not even hesitating to give up his life in order to save Bonney. I mean, we all knew after the last chapter that it would be the now main antagonist of the arc, Saturn, who would force Kuma into submission by using Bonney as a hostage, proving that the members of the Gorosei truly are the worst of the worst in this world if they're willing to go so far as to deny a little girl a cure to a life-threatening illness if her father doesn't agree to become their personal weapon. And actually, yeah, I guess that kind of goes without saying, anyone who's as comfortable with slavery and wiping out entire races as they are obviously aren't the good guys. But until this chapter, I had some hope that maybe there was just a shred of good in the 5 elders, because in prior events, they seem to show at least some morals and hesitation when ordered to do horrific acts by Emo. And I thought that maybe, just maybe, Saturn might have went easy on Kuma at God Valley and allowed him to escape with all the slaves that he managed to save, instead of simply just killing him. Because how else do you explain a child with no prior knowledge or experience in using a devil fruit that he didn't even know the name of and what powers it had, succeeding in that situation? But the way he coldly takes advantage of the situation in this chapter makes it clear that there is no good in these men. Though I will give him credit, and this might just be due to the translation and not actually the way he was intended to react to it, but once Kuma agrees to his terms, Saturn seems to show at least a little bit of remorse. Perhaps because Kuma submitted to his demand so quickly that maybe it made Saturn question for a moment, just a moment, whether he was doing the right thing. But again, that could be just the way the chapter was translated, and it could read differently when the official translation comes out. And speaking of the translation, I'm not sure if it's because of the way the chapter was translated or not, but Kizaru had a completely different speech pattern in this chapter than he usually does. He didn't draw out his words like he usually does when he's talking. He was actually talking, well, kind of normal, which made him a lot scarier in the beginning of this chapter than he usually is. But him showing up in this chapter confirms that he was the mysterious voice speaking to Saturn at the end of the last one. And once again, Saturn is using Kizaru to deal with Vegapunk, and it makes me wonder, is this simply just Saturn taking advantage of the connection these two have? Or is Kizaru Saturn's personal assistant? Like maybe each member of the Gorosei have one of the more powerful members of the Navy assigned to work directly under them. And if so, I wonder who are the other 4 Navy officers. I mean, the obvious answer would be the other admirals and the fleet commander, but at least one elder left out. And besides Garp, I can't think of a vice admiral that we know about that's strong enough to do the job. And I also kind of doubt that Fujitora will do it either, so that does leave 2 elders without someone working directly under them. Now, interestingly enough, we see a young X-Drake amongst the soldiers that Kizaru brought with him to Egghead. And seeing him here is actually kind of funny to me at least, because I recently just rewatched the fight between Kizaru and the Supernova, where Kizaru absolutely destroyed Drake. Like, he did not hold back at all in that kick. I don't really have anything else to say about him being here. I just kind of find it funny finding out that he's one of Kizaru's subordinates, considering what we know happened between the 2 of them the first time we saw them on screen together. Anyway, getting to the deal between Saturn and Kuma, it's pretty much what we all expected it to be. Kuma will spend 2 years working as a warlord while slowly going through the process of becoming a cyborg, and while it's happening, Bonney will go through 6 months of treatment and then spend a year and a half under essentially house arrest back in Sorbet Kingdom, both to let her body fully heal and to keep her under control of the world government to make sure that both Kuma and Vegapunk keep up their end of the deal. Even going so far as to assign a member of CP8 to pretend to be her nurse to keep an eye on her, which, by the way, such a wasted design for a character that we'll more than likely never see again. Like, Oda could have chose anyone we already knew to be the fake nurse in his flashback, but instead he creates a brand new character for it. Now, during the 6 months that Bonney was being treated, we get this montage of the 5 of them, Kuma, Bonney, Vegapunk, Sentomaru, and Kizaru, all having fun and growing close to each other. But even though we can see that at this point the 5 of them were close, that didn't stop Kizaru from trying to kick Bonney through the barrier, which could have killed her, and seemed like that was his intention at the time. But maybe by the end of the arc, their past connection will be enough to get him to let her go. We also see the reaction from all the other warlords about Kuma joining their little group, along with Ace, who we find out in this chapter had actually just recently killed one of the previous warlords. Like, I mean, I knew he had been offered a position and turned it down, but I had no idea that the reason why there was an opening was because he had taken one of them out. And I guess that means that we can actually blame Kuma's downfall on the legendary donut himself. I'm kidding, of course, but I do wonder, had Ace accepted the deal, I wonder what Saturn would have asked of Kuma instead. My guess, more than likely, he would have just kicked Moria out and gave Kuma his spot. And speaking of Moria, if anyone could tell me what he's doing in this chapter, please comment it down below. I honestly couldn't make out if this is him resting and recovering after failing to take out Kaido, or if Oda just messed up drawing him. Anyway, the last people we see reacting to the news about Kuma are Dragon, Sabo, and Koala, the latter two shocked and in disbelief, while Dragon, he seems quiet, a little too quiet, almost like he knew something like this would happen if Kuma went to see Vegapunk, which I'm just throwing out there might be the reason why Dragon decided to wait until there was literally no other option out there to tell Kuma that Vegapunk might be able to cure Bonney. Not saying that Dragon doesn't trust Vegapunk, but that he thought something like this might end up happening because Vegapunk works for the world government. And considering how powerful Kuma is from both his lineage and his devil fruit, him being forced to become an enforcer for the world government if you went to Vegapunk was a more than likely option. Although it was weird because based on what we've seen from Dragon during this arc, he was in contact with Vegapunk for a while. I mean, we don't know exactly how long the 2 of them were able to be in communication with each other, but we do know they had a secure network to talk to each other with. And yet, for some reason, despite being in contact with each other, Dragon wasn't aware of Kuma being turned into a mindless cyborg, because when Sabo brought Kuma back to the Revolutionary Army HQ, the way Dragon talked to him made it seem like he really was not aware that Kuma was no longer there. And you'd think that if him and Vegapunk were talking this entire time, that at some point that would have come up. And I'm sure if Dragon lands on Egghead, like many believe he will, he'll have some words to say to Vegapunk. But he'll have to be fast, because once this flashback ends, we'll be back to the present day, where both Bonney and Vegapunk are moments away from death.